In a few moments, we'll hear Apartment Hunting, a story by Harvey and Audrey Bilker. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Reardon.
Address?
West Central Park Complex 74, apartment A21L. The clerk was a bored woman between 25 and 30. Her fingers were smudged from a morning of filling out forms in triplicate and quadruplicate for computer coding. Charles Reardon's wife stood by him, her young face bright with hope for their future life together. At last, after 5 years of application, the Department of Demography had released new statistics, and the result was that the Reardons had been put on the list for a new apartment. Twice until now, their approved but contingent license for conception had expired, and they desperately wanted a child. But without the complimentary acquisition of an apartment with another bedroom, the permit was of no use. When the long form had been filled out almost in its entirety, the clerk asked,
"Have you got your apartment entry and possession kit?"
No. They said we have to have I think it was a potential tenant form first.
"I'm sorry, I cannot complete this until you have the other one."
"But that's ridiculous."
The clerk shrugged her shoulders and put the papers aside.
"Those are the rules."
"But we were notified that this is the only day we can look for an apartment. The fax letter they sent said that if we didn't complete everything today, including taking possession, we couldn't reapply for at least 2 years. The waiting list is that long."
The clerk gave them a tired smile.
"Everybody's got the same problem. There's nothing I can do."
"Well, what do the others do?"
"They get a residence interface form. What do you know about that? It allows you to apply for all your permits in any order."
Reardon began to reply gently, but his wife's loud and now irritated voice overwhelmed his politeness.
"There was nothing in the instructions about it. I studied them carefully. We were waiting outside this office from 0500 hours in line. We wanted to have enough time to look for a place. Now we've lost a couple of hours."
The clerk tapped her fingers impatiently, looking behind them at the next waiting couple.
"All I can say is get the residence interface form. Then I can put this through."
Mrs. Reardon's expression turned almost animal. Her husband put out a placating hand on her shoulder. "There's no use arguing, darling. You'll only waste time. Rules are rules." He looked apologetically at the clerk. Where do we get the residence interface form?"
"It's in this building. I'm not sure which room, though. You might try 1173.
"Okay, thank you." He let his angry wife out. The line on the inside had reached the door and continued partly down the hall outside. They stepped onto the worn plastic vertical ped tread and got off at 1173. At least the wait here wasn't too long. However, they discovered when their turn came that it wasn't 1173 at all where the residence interface forms were obtained. It was 1834. But at 1834, following a long delay, they were informed that 2021 was the proper place for what they were seeking. At 2021, they were sent to 1219. And at 1219, they were given instructions that brought them full circle back to the clerk they had seen originally. This time, she directed them to 1416. Fortunately, it turned out to be the correct place. They were finally seated opposite a scratched and pocked aluminum, titanium, tungsten desk, one of many in a large room that hadn't been surface-coated for years. A man who was prematurely time-worn slowly went about preparing the necessary form. "You young folks," he said, at the same time making notations in various blocks. "You young folks are so anxious to get a bigger place. And what difference does it make anyway? So you'll have your permitted child. So what? What does it all mean?" He looked up. The Reardons could see deep in his eyes the many years of dark thoughts. "And then you'll be 55, and it'll be all over. I'll be 55 next year. And then what?" He snorted, bounced his head up and down, then returned to his work. Finally, he tore out their copy and handed it slowly to them. Mrs. Reardon grabbed it from his hand.
Quick, let's get back. Oh, my God, it's almost 1,300 hours.
Oh, just relax, honey. Everything's going to work out all right. But she was already on her way out of the office, and he was following after, trying to keep up. When they returned to the office they had gone to in the first place, they were able to get in a shorter line because the potential tenant form had been almost completely filled out that morning. At least they didn't have to start over again. The line they had waited in during the morning was now almost completely around the outside hall. It was past 14:30 hours when they were at last able to present the residence interface form. The young girl who took it appeared to have just graduated from a government technology school. After about 10 minutes, she was still awkwardly checking through the electronic files. Mrs. Reardon, exasperated, looked at the dusty digital wall clock.
Young lady, what's the problem?
The girl walked back to the counter, her facial expression showing signs of confusion in its blankness.
I can't find your potential tenant form.
Well, it probably hasn't even been key-punched yet. That clerk over there's the one who filled it out. Why don't you ask her?
I'm not allowed to leave my department.
But she's wasting our valuable time. You're just several meters away from her, otherwise you'll be looking all day.
No, dear.
But she's wasting our valuable time. Don't you realize we have only a little over 2 hours now to get that apartment?
The girl looked at Mr. Reardon. At least he understood her problems.
I'll look again.
While the girl searched the electronic files again, Mrs. Reardon, beyond her patience, summed up her feelings by pounding lightly on the counter. Her husband attempted to assuage her anxieties, but to no avail. At last, 20 minutes later, the girl came over with the familiar form.
Reardon?
Yes, Reardon.
It was just lying on a pile on the table. Now, may I have your residence interface form, please?
Reardon gave it to her, and she opened a compartment filled with rubber stamps. After more filling out, signing, and countersigning, and stamping, the papers were complete.
Next, you have to get your apartment entry and possession kit.
Oh, it's about time.
First, though, I need your transit ident cards, and then please stand in front of those scanner screens so I can match up your physiology patterns to these cards.
Mrs. Reardon was at the end of her tether and through her teeth said,
Is that really necessary?
Yes.
It was obvious that the girl had answered that question many times before.
People do borrow cards.
After the test checked out, Mrs. Reardon gave the girl a self-satisfied scowl, but it went unnoticed. The youngster just continued her routine procedure. The girl poised a finger over a machine on the counter. The finish on the terminal was chipped and peeling.
Now, I'll put this data into the console.
As soon as she had completed the entry, the interior of the machine began to clatter, and a printout emerged. She tore off the sheet and presented it to the couple.
Today's listing is entirely of people who have not volunteered to vacate their apartments.
Reardon disappointedly clamped his lips tight and shook his head. Just our luck. The one day we get for an apartment and every one on our list is occupied.
But it's better than no apartment. At least we have a chance.
The girl leaned her head over the neatly printed sentences on the printout sheet, which were upside down to her.
You have to make your choice at this time. I'll put a hold on it until 1700 hours.
Eagerly, Mrs. Reardon perused the list as her husband tried to see over her arm. He pointed to one line. Hey, honey, look at this one. It's just a few blocks from where we live now. His wife ignored him until she had found a listing to her own liking.
Here's an apartment that's in the Riverside Park complex.
Yeah, but do you know how old those are? They were built in 25.
That's just the point. They have 2.5-meter high ceilings, 1/4 meter higher than any new legal minimum.
The girl interrupted.
You have to make up your minds. There are others waiting.
All right. We'll take this one.
She pointed to the sheet, and as an afterthought, she turned to her husband.
Is that all right with you?
Yeah, I don't want to be responsible for, picking out something you won't be satisfied with.
Very well.
The clerk said, and at the same time punched several more buttons on her terminal. Her voice became a monotone as she reeled off instructions.
You must let us know by the apartment communicator equipment that you've obtained the apartment. And it must be before 1700 hours because of the geriatric fair play law. Here's your code.
She handed the Reardons a card on which she had made a notation.
When the message is received, tenancy will be officially recorded under your name. Try not to do too much damage obtaining the unit, unless it's absolutely necessary. Immediately with your call, of course, a removal team will be sent over.
Once again, the Reardons found themselves in the center of the building's activity. They boarded the ped tread for a trip to, hopefully, the last department that they had to visit. After more waiting, at 15 hours, they were handed a carrying case. The bag's exterior was badly scuffed, and the seals were no longer secure. Reardon grinned at his wife. Okay, honey, let's go.
Oh, no. Not until I check to see that everything is here.
They took the case aside as the line moved forward and opened it. Pasted on the inside of the battered lid was a sheet of paper that had curled away at the corners. Mrs. Reardon read the list of components from it and went through each item in the various compartments.
Aha. Just what I thought.
She forced her way back into line, in front of the person who was now first.
The cutter is missing.
She told the man behind the counter who had issued the kit. He took a sheet from one of the piles of papers next to him and gave it to her. Fill this out.
No, sir. You're not going to push me around. Give me a cutter from another kit, or give me a new kit.
I can't do that, ma'am.
Well, you'd better. Or else I'm going to stand right here and not let anybody get in front of me.
You can complain to the department head if you'd like.
I'll do it my way. It's the only way to get results.
Hey, look, lady, said the man she had pushed aside. Oh, look, I want to get taken care of, too. You gotta follow the proper procedures. That's what I did. And the day's almost over.
Exactly. That's why I'm going to stand here until 1700 hours if necessary.
A number of people in line began to shout at her, but she stood fast, stone-faced. Look, why don't you give her what she wants? Otherwise, none of us will ever get apartments.
I can't. I'm not permitted to. We have to keep exact inventory records.
All right, lady. I'll tell you what I'll do. You can have the one from my kit. I'm sure I can make do with the other tools. At least if you get what you want, the rest of us will have a chance. Mrs. Reardon agreed to that suggestion. And when the man got his kit, he opened it, took out the cutter, and gave it to Mrs. Reardon. She smiled to herself with satisfaction, not even bothering to thank the man.
Here. Put this in our kit and let's get out of here. We only have about a half hour left.
On traffic level number 3, north, they found a cab portation terminal box and signaled. After almost 15 minutes, their conveyor railed up, and they got in, and Reardon gave the address to the pudgy-faced operator. Traffic was extremely heavy since it was the end of the second daily work period, and they arrived at the apartment house with about a quarter of an hour to go. The wait for the small, creaking vertiped tread was agonizing, but it came at last, and finally they reached their destination, the 40th floor.
It's 40K5,
said Mrs. Reardon, rushing down the threadbare hall carpet, her husband padding hurriedly after her. They located the correct door quickly. Reardon knocked. Open up, please.
No, you're not going to get in.
Break it down.
Her husband stood back and then ran against the door several times with his full weight, but he was not successful. In the meantime, Mrs. Reardon had opened the kit and was rummaging through the equipment.
Here, try these.
And she handed her husband a large ring of keys. He looked quickly through them and said, there just isn't enough time to find one at my work.
Yes. If we don't call in by 1700 hours, we're disqualified. You'd better shoot it open.
She took the gun from the kit and gave it to him. He put the weapon to the lock and fired. Metal and wood fragments clouded back in a slight haze. He pushed the door, but it stopped, slightly ajar. She's got one of those old chains on it.
Only 5 minutes.
Give me the cutter.
See, I was right when I put up a fight for this.
Reardon hooked the cutter around the chain and turned it on. Slowly, the instrument began to penetrate a link. Then finally, the chain separated and its severed ends clattered apart.
Oh, thank God.
Now, with ease, they both pushed the door completely open. In front of a window, in a soft chair of ancient vintage, its padding worn and faded, sat a woman with grayish hair. She must have been young, not too long ago, it seemed. In fact, her features weren't really that aged. A fair semblance of her youthful past was still evident. In its extreme youth, her appearance had no doubt been sweet. However, at the sight of the intruders, her lips twisted, and in an instant years were added to her demeanor. Mrs. Reardon looked at her watch again.
Only 4 minutes. Get it over with.
The tenant nodded her head with resignation.
Someday, you'll be old, too. And strangers will come and do this to you.
Then, strangely, her expression changed, softened. The instinct of self-preservation appeared to have broken through.
Oh, please, let me have one more day.
She turned her head slowly to the window where the dying sun streamed in. The city below, its distant white towers and buildings on the New Jersey side were streaked orange as the sky gave up its full energy. She continued to look at the sight before her as if she wanted to absorb it into her entire being.
For God's sakes, don't waste any more time.
Reardon raised the gun and aimed it across the room as precisely as he could at the woman's temple. A calm had now come over her as she continued to view, almost hypnotized, the brightly illuminated scene outside her apartment. Her expression was placid, yet enthralled, as if she were beholding a treasure. Reardon's eyes suddenly brimmed with tears until liquid lenses so thick were formed that he had to clamp his lids closed to release the fluid. It ran in warm rivulets down his cheeks to his chin, where he could feel the stream suddenly cooled, dripping to his shirt. But his eyes quickly refilled, and once more he had to blink hard to clear the vision. It was important for him to see accurately, for the woman's sake.
It's almost 1700 hours. We've got to call in on the communicator.
As Reardon continued sighting the woman along the barrel of his gun, scenes of his past and fantasies of his future suddenly flashed before his unsquinted eye, and he felt his taut shoulders collapse. I can't, he told his wife, aiming the gun half-heartedly now.
If we don't get the apartment, someone else will.
Reardon pulled the trigger. Concludes with a short story by Philip Jose Farmer. This is The King of the Beasts. The biologist was showing the distinguished visitor through the zoo and laboratory. He said,
"Our budget is too limited to recreate all known extinct species, so what we do is bring to life only the higher animals, the beautiful ones that were wantonly exterminated. I'm trying, as it were, to make up for brutality and stupidity. You might say that man struck God in the face every time he wiped out a branch of the animal kingdom."
He paused, and they looked across the moats and the force fields. The quagga wheeled and galloped, the light and sun flashing off his flanks. The sea otter poked his humorous whiskers from the water. The gorilla peered from behind bamboo. Passenger pigeons strutted. A rhinoceros trotted like a dainty battleship. And with gentle eyes, a giraffe looked at them, then resumed eating leaves.
"And there's the dodo, not beautiful, but very droll and very helpless. Come, I'll show you the recreation of the
In the great buildings, they passed between rows of tall and wide tanks. They could see clearly through the windows and the jelly within.
Those are African elephant embryos. We plan to grow a large herd and then release them on the new government preserve."
"You positively radiate," said the distinguished visitor. "You really love the animals, don't you?"
"I love all life."
Tell me, where do you get the data for recreation?"
"Oh, mostly skeletons and skins from the ancient museums. Excavated books and films that we succeeded in restoring and then translating. See those huge eggs? The chicks of the giant moa are growing within them. And these, almost ready to be taken from the tank, are tiger cubs. They'll be dangerous when grown, but they'll be confined to the preserve."
The visitor stopped before the last of the tanks. Just one here? What is it?"
"Oh, the poor little thing. It'll be so alone. But I shall give it all the love I have."
"Is it so very dangerous? Worse than elephants, tigers, and the bears?"
"I had to get special permission to grow this one."
The visitor stepped sharply back from the tank. He said, "Well, then it must be, but you wouldn't dare." The biologist nodded.
"Yes,